Previously I made ranking videos for the Suikoden 1, 2 and 3 characters, but now it's time to make the lowest viewed video in the history of YouTube by ranking the Suikoden 4 characters. I posted a community message some days ago on YouTube asking about if I should include the tactics characters in this video as well, and the responses were mixed. Some people said include them, and some people said to make it 2 videos and rank the Suikoden 4 and tactics cast separately, and that's what I was initially going to do. But after thinking about it, seeing as Suikoden Tactics is a direct follow-up to Suikoden 4, and around 45 or so of the 60 recruitable characters and tactics are returning characters from Suikoden 4, the 2 videos would be nearly identical, so I'll be including the tactics characters in this ranking video as well. And as usual, this is a personal favourites ranking list, and I'll be judging the characters based on how much I like them overall. That will be a mixture of how good they are in combat, how fun they are in combat, their design, their story, their backstory. You know the drill by now, it's not strictly a combat rank list, it's just how much I personally like the character. Now that might be a tad unfair, as the characters that appear in both Suikoden 4 and Tactics may be ranked higher than those who only appear in one of the games. But hey, it is what it is. And as always, as this is a personal favourites ranking, these are just my opinions on the characters, so if I rank your favourite characters low or your least favourite characters high, who cares? It's not a big deal. You could rank all of my favourites in the bottom tier, and I genuinely could not care less. And I'll be honest, before I start, this is my 4th attempt to record this video. I tried recording it last Monday, Wednesday and Saturday, and each time I got bored within 10 to 15 minutes while talking about the characters, and I ended up playing Halo instead. I just don't care for the vast majority of this game's cast, and I'm certain most of you feel the same. So this may not be as interesting as the Suikoden 1, 2 and 3 character ranking videos, because unlike with previous games in the series where we all formed strong connections with many of the characters, I didn't form any real connection with the majority of the Suikoden 4 cast, as the game is considered by the majority of the fandom, and myself included, to be the worst game in the main series with a largely uninteresting and forgettable cast of characters. I think the reason they're so uninteresting and forgettable to many of us partially has to do with how boring and generic many of their designs are, but also because of the art style of the game. It simply isn't as good as the other games in the series. And I'm sure the lack of interest people have in the game's story didn't help either. So I don't think I'll have a lot to say about some of these characters, and there certainly won't be as many controversial character placements as there were in the Suikoden 1, 2 and 3 character ranking videos, but there will still be some controversial picks. So as always, why don't we try to start things off with a controversial pick to get people's blood boiling? And who better to start things off with than one of the most hated and misunderstood characters in the series? And that is none other than Snow Vingerhut. Snow is hated by the majority of the fans, and rightfully so. He's meant to be unlikable, but I kind of like him. Well, not really like him, but more that I appreciate his role. He's the opposite of Laslo in just about every way. He's rich, he's spoiled, he's weak, he's envious, he's cowardly. He's a very flawed person, but he's a product of his environment. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was desperate to prove that he wasn't just some spoiled brat of a noble, but that's exactly what he is. His father exerted his influence to continuously put him into leadership positions that he wasn't trained for and he wasn't experienced enough to have. He was continuously over his head, and he had the weight of his father's expectations on his shoulders. He had this need for constant reassurance and praise, and that led him to being jealous of his best friend who, received all of the praise for being all of the things that Snow was supposed to be, for doing everything that Snow was meant to do, for being the type of person that Snow was raised to be but couldn't live up to. He was a spoiled brat with an inflated ego and sense of superiority, but in truth, he was a timid coward and his jealousy spawned from that. And it may not seem like it, but Snow played a very important role in Laslo unlocking the Rune of Punishment's true power, in Laslo breaking the curse. You know, Laslo's forgiving nature and his continued forgiveness of those like Snow who greatly and repeatedly wronged him, it led to Laslo lifting the rune's curse. Without characters like Snow, who Laslo would have every reason to want to use the rune's power to punish, the rune would still be cursed and claiming victims. That said, I always save the game before I recruit Snow so I can execute him first, just to get it out of my system. So if I was in Laslo's shoes, the cycle of death and suffering would still be going on. Now this is probably going to be on the controversial side, but I'm going to put Snow in the A tier. I think he is a fantastic character and I think he's greatly misunderstood. And since we've ranked Snow, let's rank his dad, Vincent. I've already covered it with Snow, but he pretty much represents everything we hate about nobility. He's snobbish, he pushes his weight around and his wealth around, he exerts his influence to give his family unfair advantages. He flees Razril at the first sign of trouble and then returns after the war to try and, lord over everyone again. He's a sack of garbage, but he played his role well, although he does have a very minor role, so I'm going to put him into the D tier. I'm probably going to try and go through this alphabetically, or as alphabetically as I possibly can, rather than in previous videos where I just kind of pluck people out at random, because I feel like if I try to pluck at random, I'm going to forget who half the cast are, because I can remember the names, but with Suikoden 4 I sometimes struggle to put the names to faces, so I will try to do it as alphabetically as possible. So next up, alphabetically, we would have Adrian. I'll put her in the C tier. She's the blacksmith. What is there to say? She just exists to sharpen your weapons. She did appear in Tactics as well as 4, where she gave you a bunch of quests. Nothing special, she goes in the C tier. Next up we have Agnes. Agnes is a tricky one to rank. I like her design, but I dislike her role in the story. She suffers much in the same way that many of the cast do, and that is by being completely underutilized. I know she's only an apprentice and she's still in training, but she might just be the most useless strategist in the main series. She done nothing of note in the entire game, and during the one battle where she does take the lead as the strategist, there was nothing for her to do, as Eleanor's plan had already destroyed the majority of the Kuluk fleet before the battle even began. She was more like Eleanor's cupbearer than her apprentice. The most useful thing she done in the entire game was keep Eleanor's wine glass full. And along with Agnes, I'll rank Eleanor. They're my two least liked strategists in the main series. Honestly, I don't think Eleanor actually done much or any strategizing throughout the entire game. It was mostly advice and orders like, go here, get these guys to join us. It wasn't really until the final battle where she actually provided an actual battle plan. So they're definitely two of the weakest and most underutilized strategists in the series, and for that I'm going to put both Agnes and Eleanor in the D tier. Now, next up alphabetically we would have Akagi. I want to say Akagi. And if I'm ranking Akagi, I may as well do Mizuki and Ramada as well. They're a package deal. So Akagi, I started out not liking him or caring for him as a character, but as the game goes on, he does become more considerate and caring for those around him, rather than just caring for himself and his original companions of Mizuki and Ramada. As for Mizuki, I think we can all agree that she is the Kasumi of this game. She's cute, she's got a great design, and she's an absolute badass in combat. What's there not to love about her? And Ramada, well, I do have a big complaint to make about Ramada. He had, at least I think he had, ridiculous plot armor for seemingly no reason whatsoever. Towards the end of the game, he infiltrated Eliel. Graham Cray shot him with a poison dart, and then with what should have been his final breaths, he managed to deliver a message back to your ship with his carrier bird. The first poison dart should have killed him, and you're led to believe that he's dead. Fast forward, days have passed, you've invaded Elil, and right as Graham Cray is shooting a poison dart at Eleanor, Ramada magically appears just in time where he takes a second poison dart that was meant for Eleanor, saving her life, and then he's dragged back to the ship and makes a miraculous recovery. How? That's a double dose of an unknown poison, and there's no way that someone like Graham Cray is using some generic common poison. If the first dart had killed him, it would have been an impactful death and it would have given the scene more meaning. I always thought it was dumb. Ramada dying in that moment would have been a good end to his story, and the scenes would have hit harder. But unfortunately, his silly plot armor kept him alive. And you know what, I'll rank Kate with them too. She's from the same village as Akagi and Mizuki, and supposedly they're the last 3 survivors of their hometown. She's older than the other two, she's a lot more composed and sociable than they are, and let's be real, she's got legs for days. But in terms of combat, I don't see much reason to use her. She's got decent stats, but she just doesn't stack up to the damage output of Mizuki. You know, up until this point, with the exception of Kasumi, I never really clicked or cared much for the ninja characters, and again, the same is true here. You know, they're alright, they're just not really my vibe, but I do like Mizuki almost as much as I like Kasumi. So I'm going to put Mizuki in the A tier, and then I'm going to put Akagi and Kate in the C tier. And as for Ramada, I don't know, where will I put Ramada? Ramada I'll put in the D tier. I was thinking in my head there C tier, but then I was like, no, I don't like him as much as Akagi or Kate, but I don't exactly hate him either. He is D tier, but I'd say he's more like an upper D tier, just hovering below the C tier. Next up we have Aldo. I don't really know how to feel about Aldo. He's a nice guy and he's got a sad story. You know, first he was stranded on an island after being left behind by his companions, and then after the game he meets a tragic end, but I just don't use him. I think he's a victim of the reduced party size limit and not being as useful as the other archers in the game. The 4-person party didn't do the cast here any favours. That said, while I may not use him in combat, I do like his story, so I'm going to put Aldo in the C tier. Next up we have Ameria. She's a decent combat character, but again, I don't really use her. I don't particularly care for her design, but I do like her story. She was hired by the people of Razrul to protect them against Kuluk. You know, I'm not really sure what they expected one mercenary to do against an invading force, but you know, she honored her contract and she helped fight the Kuluk soldiers. I like her more in tactics than I do in Suikoden 4, but I still didn't really use her in tactics either. Yeah, I'm going to put her in the C tier. Next we have Axel. I love Axel's design and I really like his story. He's kind of arrogant and hot-tempered, which does leave him prone to making rash decisions. He's also very prejudiced against the elves on Naval, but as the war goes on, he grows and he does start to lose that prejudice. And after the war, he takes over as chieftain of Naval and he starts working towards improving relations between the humans and the elves. That said, while I do like his design and his story, I rarely ever use him in combat despite him hitting like a truck. He doesn't really fit in with my party setup and that's not his fault. That is again a fault of the game's limited 4-person party. If the 6-person party system remained in place, Axel is a character that I would have used a lot more than I did. But in Suikoden Tactics, he was an absolute beast as a frontliner and he was a mainstay in my party from the moment I recruited him. I'm going to put him in the A tier because I think A tier is fair. Like I said, didn't use him much in 4, used him a lot in Tactics. But the only reason I didn't use him in 4 was the limited party system. So I think A tier for his story, for his ability, for his design. I think A tier is good placement for Axel. Next up we have Bang. I think that was his name, Bang. That's kind of a dumb name. I think he was the lottery guy, you know, whatever. I'm going to put him in the C tier. The lottery was kind of fun, I guess. Next, after him, we have Bartholomew. I'm going to put Bartholomew in the D tier. I remember his name, but that's it. I think maybe he killed some Kuluk soldiers and then went into hiding. I'm not sure. I honestly can't remember anything about him. He's going in the D tier for being forgettable. And then next we have Basil. He's also going to go in the D tier. He's the Tops minigame guy, and I only remember that because I just recently done the minigame video and I had to play Tops. If I didn't do that video recently, I honestly would have forgotten who this character was, so he's going in the D tier, and also Tops sucks. So next, let's rank Brando, and with Brando, I'll rank Edgar, Peck, and Kika. You know, they're a package deal, they're all kind of interlinked. But first things first, can I just say how heartbreaking it was to see what happened to Peck in Suikoden Tactics. You know, to learn how he became as disfigured as he was. He was just a young sailor who idolized Brando, and he met a horrible fate for his loyalty. So Peck, I'm going to put Peck immediately into the B tier. I know he's not around for much of the game. He's only around in the beginning of Tactics and the beginning of 4, but I genuinely liked Peck as a character, and I thought he had a very tragic story. And now for Brando, Edgar, and Kika. They were a trio of best friends, and I believe Edgar and Kika were lovers. Now, as is the case with the majority of Suikoden 4's pirates, they're not actually really, you know, piratey pirates. They don't pillage and plunder, but instead they're a bunch of do-gooders with strong senses of justice. Doesn't seem very piratey to me, but hey, that's Suikoden 4. So their story was that they were hunting down this pirate called Steel, who, unlike the vast majority of Suikoden 4's pirates, he was actually evil, who terrorized the seas, pillaging, plundering, robbing, murdering while he was in possession of the Rune of Punishment. When they finally caught up to him, both Edgar and Steel were killed during the battle, and the rune jumped into Brando, who then chose to isolate himself and resort to actual piracy to survive. He became one of the most feared pirates on the seas, much like Steel was. So you kind of have to feel for Brando. He was a good person who ended up having to do terrible things to stay alive, and he had to isolate himself from all of his loved ones to keep them safe. And I know Kika is the poster girl of Suikoden 4, and she's near universally praised and adored by fans of the game, and honestly, I used to feel the same. I used to love these characters, and there was a time where Kika never would have left my party in any playthrough, and I would have put them all in the S or A tier. But I'm getting really tired of the good guy pirate shtick this game tried to do, and I'm going to, possibly controversially, put all 3 of them in the C tier. Now I know I'm going to get some abuse for that one. I know I am. Maybe not for Edgar and Brando, but for Kika, I feel like some people are going to be up in arms over the fact that I haven't put her up in the A or S tier. But look, like I said, I'm tired of the good guy pirate shtick. It's getting old, and after playing the game 10 times, it's like, enough is enough. And since I mentioned Steel, I should rank Steel as well. I have no idea how this guy survived for 7 years with the Rune of Punishment. He's barely used in the game, to be honest. He shows up for 2 early battles at the beginning of Tactics, and then he dies. But despite his short time on screen, we see enough to know exactly the kind of horrible person he is. I'll put him in the D tier, except that I don't see his portrait on the list here, so I guess I'm not ranking him after all. Okay then. So next we would have Breck. Oh, Breck, you absolute disgusting slob with no personal hygiene. And you know what? The sad part is, he actually seems to take pride in his lack of hygiene. It's disgusting. But at the same time, I wish I had an army of him so I could send them in on the first wave to board enemy vessels. Yeah, I think I might have occasionally used him as a gunner in some of the war battles. But aside from that, he doesn't really play much of a role or do anything. He does have a partner. What was his name? Django, something like that. Again, just like Breck, I think I might have used them as a gunner or something in a war battle once or twice, but after that, I completely ignored both of their existence. I'm going to put them both in the E tier because, let's be real, they are absolutely atrocious characters. So now I just need to find Django on the list here. Give me a moment. Here you are. When there's so many portraits, I know I've said it in previous videos, but when there's so many portraits, even though they're primarily done alphabetically, when you're staring at that many, you get jumbled up, and it's hard to find them sometimes. So next, I suppose another duo. Carrie is up next, but with Carrie, you gotta rank Yu, who's her mentor. You know, Carrie knew Doctor and Apprentice. I don't really remember much about them, but I think that's because they didn't actually do much of anything in the game. But in Suikoden Tactics, they were both fantastic healers and they saw regular use in my party. Particularly Carrie, as if I'm remembering correctly, she had this area heal. Now, I might be misremembering that. It's been a while since I played Tactics. Maybe it was you who had that area heal. Anyway, I'm going to put them both in the C tier. And again, that's only because of how useful I found them to be in Tactics. If they weren't utterly useless in Suikoden 4, I think I would probably rank them in the B tier. But for what they are, C tier is fair. Next up on the list, we have Cedric. I don't even remember what he done in the game. I want to say he was responsible for us being able to sail faster, but you know, I honestly can't remember. What I do remember is that he was being chased by Rachel, who was sent to collect on his Dine and Dash debts. And since we mentioned Rachel, she reminds me a lot of Camille from Suikoden 1. She's the spear-wielding debt collector who was chasing him down. I think she's got a cute design and she's fun in combat. She kind of hints that she's got a crush on Cedric, and Cedric clearly has a crush on her. After the game, Cedric runs off, you know, hoping that Rachel will keep chasing after him, which is exactly what she does while swearing to make him pay for his meals. They did both show up in Tactics as well. I didn't really use Cedric as I don't believe he could attack. I think he only increased your unit's dodge or something. And Rachel wasn't really anything special in either game in terms of combat. She was maybe, at best, slightly above average, but for someone who joins you at the end of the game, slightly above average just doesn't cut it. That said, I do kind of like Rachel despite how not useful she is, so I'm going to put Cedric in the D tier. And Rachel, I'm going to put into the C tier. And I think that's fair. Yeah, a lot of characters kind of hovering in the middle of the pack here, but that's Suikoden 4 in a nutshell. And next up, we have Chadley. I'm not really sure how to rank him, to be honest. I don't even know what I can really say about him. He's just the item store guy. Doesn't have a story, doesn't have a backstory. He really just exists to open a store and sell you stuff. He's going into the C tier. Next, is that Champo? I think Champo the cat. I'm going to rank Champo, Chipu, and Nalkol, I want to say. I hate all three of them. Absolutely horrid characters with atrocious voice acting. Now, I'm a cat person in real life. I love cats, I adore them. But these three characters are complete and utter trash. From their design, to their role in the story, to their voice acting, even their town's design sucks. Everything about them sucks, and I hope we never see another Nakobold again in a Suikoden game. I am sorry, but they are all going in the garbage tier. Maybe there's a few people who'll give me some flack for that one, but I don't care. They are horrible characters. Charlemagne. I am going to put Charlemagne straight into the B tier. He's a stand-up guy, always happy, always polite, always nice to everyone. He's a solid, above-average swordsman, and he's decent in combat in both Suikoden 4 and Tactics. And since we ranked, I should say, Charlemagne, we may as well rank Helga, because I do remember that Helga was kind of, but not really, interlinked with Charlemagne. She destroyed his inn in Middleport, and then he agreed to cover the costs so that she could join you. But that's really all that I remember about Helga. So I'm going to put Helga in the D tier. You know, next on the list we have Dario, but I'm going to skip Dario for now. I'm looking to the left of him and I'm seeing Graham Cray and his son. And I'm kind of questioning, why is Graham Cray's son even on this list? He's dead before the events of the game even begin. You know, and you only see a little vision of him in the Rune of Punishment. I don't know why he's on this list. I don't even know what to say about him. He's a bread guy, you know, I can't relate. I'm not really a bread person. I like the occasional slice of toast with a bit of Kerrygold. Yeah, I don't know how to rank him. Do you rank him off of his backstory from the manhunting raids where he killed himself with the Rune of Punishment trying to protect his village? But even still, you know, I don't know how to place him. He's got a tragic story, but it's just a bit of tiny background information. And again, he's not even really in the game. I'll put him in the C tier. Why not? And while I'm ranking him, I may as well rank his dad, Graham Cray. So Graham, unlike a lot of people, I actually liked Graham Cray as a villain, despite how poorly the story portrayed him. Everything he'd done, you know, the sole reason for starting the war, for doing all the horrible things he did, was to reclaim the Rune of Punishment so that he could relive his son's memories and his time with him. He needed far more screen time than he was given, but again, that's the problem with Suikoden 4. Nobody ever received the screen time they needed, nobody was as fleshed out as they should have been, and the majority of the cast and the story suffered for it. I'm going to put Graham Cray in the B tier. Maybe a tad controversial, but he's going in B because I love a villain with a tragic backstory. You know, deep down, he obviously blames himself for his son's death because the Rune of Punishment only jumped into his son's body after Graham cut his own hand off to rid himself of the rune. Can you really sit there and say that if you lost your child the way he did, and there was a way to relive those memories, that you wouldn't do what he done? We'd all like to sit here and say no, we wouldn't. The grief and the guilt of what he went through could break anyone, and ultimately it was partially his fault. The guilt and grief of what he went through could break anyone, and his son's death was partially his fault. The game's writing and the rushed feeling of the story didn't do Graham Cray any justice. And since I'm ranking villains, I'm thinking I'll rank Colton. But I don't see Colton on the list here, unless I'm blind, but I'm not seeing him. Just give me a second. I'm doing a quick scan through, but yeah, I don't see Colton anywhere on this list. Which is strange because Colton was a villain in the game. Well, not really a villain, an antagonist. He showed up regularly throughout the game. You know, give me 1 second. I am going to grab a picture of Colton. I'm going to upload it and include it on the list manually here myself, so I'm going to have to edit that part in. So just 1 moment. Okay, I have edited Colton's picture in. I'm going to throw him up here at the top for a moment. Now, maybe I'm blind and he was on the list, but I still can't see him except for the one I just added. So the reason I added Colton after not seeing him is because I like Colton. He's the grumpy old enemy general who doesn't take any chances. He's the commander of the Kuluk Second Fleet. He plays a fairly sizable role in the story. He's kind of reluctantly and begrudgingly going along with Graham Cray's plans out of his stubborn loyalty to Kuluk. You know, he's loyal to Kuluk to a fault, and it is the stubbornness of his old age. He's set in his ways, but despite that stubborn loyalty, he holds no resentment towards his son when his son betrays Kuluk, which brings me to his son, who I believe is called Helmut. I quite like Helmut. He reminds me a lot of Griffith from Suikoden 1, where he cares so deeply for the men under his command to the point that he surrenders peacefully and even agrees to join you in exchange for their safety. And he's a solid all-rounder in combat too, being good at both melee and magic. He's usually one of my go-to party members when I recruit him. And since we're ranking Colton and his son Helmut, we gotta rank Troy, since Troy was Colton's superior officer and the commander of the First Fleet. And oh boy, what to say about Troy. I think Troy is quite possibly the biggest case of wasted potential in the entire series. With the backstory he had of, nearly single-handedly destroying the entire Gaian fleet, earning himself the nickname of Child of the Sea God or something. Survivors of the Gaian fleet spread stories about him. He wasn't just feared, he was regarded with awe and respected. He was the only real general that Kuluk had in the game that was reasonable and level-headed. He thought things through. He was opposed to the use of the rune cannon on Eluya Island because he rightfully feared it would rally all of the other islands against them, which it did end up doing. He was opposed to strong-arm tactics on Naval and instead wanted a peaceful alliance, which, it was working until a pretty smart plot from the elves to poison the Kuluk soldiers, which then caused the soldiers to retaliate on their own accord by slaughtering the villagers. If Graham Cray wasn't around, if it was Troy who was responsible for leading the Kuluk Navy's invasion of the island nations, I think Kuluk would have successfully won the war. But Graham Cray was around, and Graham's plan wasn't to win. He didn't care about Kuluk or the islands, he only wanted to lure out and claim the Rune of Punishment. I think Troy's death is ultimately what led to the downfall of the Imperial faction within Kuluk. With him now gone, there was no one really left to oppose the patriarchal faction that led to Iscus being able to make his move and begin his coup, which led to the Empire's dissolution. But I'm kind of getting off topic. Troy, I think, is an underutilized and wasted character. He could have been something amazing, but again, as is the case with Suikoden 4, characters receive nowhere near enough screen time, not enough dialogue, and a far smaller role than they should have had. So how do I rank them? Colton I will put into the C tier. You can really tell the C tier is filling up. I like him, but he's nothing special. Helmut I'll put in... Well, that's a good one now. Helmut. Where do I put Helmut? I do like Helmut a lot. He's not S tier. He's either A tier or B tier, but I'm going to go A tier. If he appeared in Tactics, I probably would have put him in the S tier, but I'm going to keep him in the A tier because I don't know, he's lacking something. I think it's his ending. I don't really like his ending where he just vanishes with his dad. I think he had potential to be so much more. As for Troy, oh god, he's a hard one to rank. He was disgustingly underutilized. Can I really rank him for what could have been? I feel like I have to rank him for what we got, and what we got was a complete and utter bitter disappointment. He should have been an S tier character, but I think what we got is a D tier character. Maybe that's harsh. Maybe it is harsh. Maybe I am being very harsh, but I think he was horribly underutilized. I think the writers failed him, and I think he has to go down in JRPG history as one of the biggest cases of wasted character potential ever. Next, let's rank Dario. What to say about Dario? He's annoying. He's a complete fool, he's hot-headed, he's quick to pick fights. But I suppose he does have a good heart, and everything he does seems to stem from wanting to do the right thing, which is odd considering he's meant to be a pirate. But again, the majority of Suikoden 4's pirates are largely not piratey at all and seem to fight against injustices by attacking greedy rich merchant ships who were abducting and smuggling mermaids, weapon smugglers, things like that. Not very piratey, but hey, again, I'm going a bit off topic. So with Dario, I'm going to have to rank his son Nalio. But, here's something most people may not know about Nalio. They're not blood related. Nalio is actually Dario's adopted son, but Nalio isn't aware that he's adopted. Nalio's mother is actually Louise, who is the bartender in your headquarters. For unknown reasons, she gave up Nalio shortly after he was born, and she asked Dario, who was an old friend of hers, to take care of him. She claimed the father was already dead, but was he? I'm going way off topic here. I'm supposed to be talking about Dario, but whatever. So who was the father? Possibly Ornan, but we don't know for certain. Now let me explain Ornan. Ornan was on a journey searching for a woman, an old lover who had left him a long time ago, and Louise bore a strong resemblance to her, but nothing really came of it, and Ornan continued his search. So, was that so long ago that Ornan doesn't fully remember her? Did she change her appearance somewhat? Was it just a fling and he can't quite place her because it's been so long? Did she really only just bear a passing resemblance to the woman he was searching for? We don't know, but Louise did vanish and run off after the events of Suikoden 4, so maybe there was something to it. Again, we don't know, and frankly, I suspect the vast majority of you couldn't care less about Dario, Nalio, Louise, and Ornan's family life. And again, I got sidetracked yapping about their lore, which happens quite a lot, I find. Look, I like Dario and Nalio. I think they're fun characters in Suikoden 4. They do both appear in Suikoden Tactics as well, and in Suikoden Tactics, Nalio is an absolute beast. I'm going to put Dario... Look, while Dario is kind of annoying and hot-headed and everything, he is a good person and I do like him. So I'm going to put Dario in the C tier. Nalio... Maybe this is on the controversial side, but I'm going to put Nalio in the A tier. I think he's a good kid, and he's a good kid in Suikoden 4. And in Suikoden Tactics, like I said, he is an absolute beast in combat. So he's going into the A tier. Now, as for the other two, Louise, she's fine, but she's really just the barkeep that changes your party. So, how do you rank people like that? Do you just put them in the middle of the pack and go C tier, which again, I think seems fair. As for Ornan, I genuinely don't care about him. I think he's a boring character. I'm going to put him in the E tier. And you know what? Looking at the list so far, I know I've ranked a lot of people, but I'm surprised by how many people I have in the A and B tier already. I was thinking by the end of this list, I might have less than 10 people in S, A, and B combined, but I'm already at what, 9? 8, sorry, 8, I can't count. I'm surprised there's that many up there already. And right then, next we have Deborah, the usual uninteresting gossip character. You know how I feel about those by now. Absolute garbage, complete and utter gutter trash. And along with Deborah, we have to rank her gossip partner, Oscar. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I used to think Oscar was a woman, much like how we all thought Marco from Suikoden 1 was an old lady. I know, Marco, Oscar, how could you think they're women with names like those? Well, look at him. He looks like a woman, and the series is notorious for bad translations. I don't even remember Oscar's role in the game or what he done. He's a totally forgettable character, and like I said, the gossip characters, I absolutely hate them, so he is also going in the garbage tier. And next up we have Desmond. He's Flair's personal assistant. Aside from a small moment where he spots you stranded at sea and recognizes the rune on your hand, He kind of fizzles out of the game completely, and all he really offers is the ability to change your party members, much like Louise does, so I'm going to put him in the C tier. He's nothing special. And next up we have Emma or Ema. I'm not sure. I think Emma. So she did have a husband called Gary. I remember him. He had some really ugly, hard mustache. So he should stand out like a sore thumb on... Yeah, there you are. Your horrible, horrible mustache. I don't remember what they done in truth. I remember they lingered around the Obel Palace a lot, but I don't recall them ever actually doing anything. I think they might have been gardeners for the Obel Palace. I don't know. I think they're two wastes of character slots. They're forgettable characters who played no role whatsoever, so you two can go into the E tier. And next up we have Etienne, who was the game's musician. I'm going to put him into the C tier. Look, if there's one thing that Suikoden 4 done well, it was its soundtrack. Suikoden 4's soundtrack was absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, Etienne didn't offer the full soundtrack to listen to, but there was still a sizable chunk of songs, so I'm going to put him in the C tier. And if we're ranking Etienne, we obviously have to rank everybody's favourite aristocrat, Stotelheim Reinbach III. Did I butcher that pronunciation? You're damn right I did. The man, the myth, the legend himself. It all started as a joke in Suikoden 1. He wears the most flamboyant clothes and he speaks and acts in the most theatrical way. How can you not love him? And unlike many of the other nobles and aristocrats in Suikoden, he's not a piece of garbage and he's genuinely a good person. He's the opposite of his father in every way. Stat-wise, I think he was fairly average. He had low HP, low MP, and because of that, you're probably not going to use him, but his rune is pretty fun and he's got a lot of versatility with 2 open rune slots. I think he's a wonderful character. He does return in Suikoden Tactics, where he's one of my favourite characters to use. He's a solid character. I'm going to put Stotelheim in the A tier. Wonderful character. And if we're ranking him, I think we gotta rank his companion, his ever faithful servant, Mickey. I don't really remember much about Mickey except that he wrote a book about Reinbach. Where can I rank Mickey? C tier? Do I put him in the C tier? He is a kind of a forgettable character, but you know what? Anyone associated with Reinbach is going middle of the pack or higher at the very least. And that brings me to his dad. This piece of trash. Absolutely horrible person. He represents pretty much everything wrong with nobility. He gives the illusion of being this wonderful, caring person, but in actuality, he's the scum of the earth, let's be honest. He often does, shady backroom deals, secretly trading rune cannons, ammunition, and weapons to anyone who'll pay for them. He also kept the pirate Sigurd and his crew in his employ to do his dirty work. He'd send them out to attack anyone leaving the port who knew too much about his dealings. But as horrible of a person as he is, I like the role that he plays, and he does play it well. Although he is a very minor character with a very small role, and for that he's going to go in the D tier. If he had a larger role to play, I probably would have put him in the C tier. Which brings me to Sigurd. And since Sigurd and Hervey are a package deal, we gotta rank them together. They're the classic pretty boy duo that Suikoden loves. They're probably 2 of the more fleshed out characters from Suikoden 4. I really like their backstory of enemies to friends. I kind of touched on Sigurd's backstory, how he was in the employ of Reinbach II. During Suikoden Tactics, Hervey was hired by your group as a guide and you clashed with Sigurd during a battle with Steel. At the time, Sigurd and Hervey were at odds, rivals if you will. After the battle, they both ended up in the Pirate's Nest where they swore service to Kika, and they've been pretty much best buds ever since. I think it's a good story, and unlike a lot of the cast, They actually had effort put into their story. I also love their designs. They're both great in combat too, and they're even better in Suikoden tactics. So Sigurd and Hervey, I am going to put both of them in the A tier. I think they are fantastic characters. And I think most people would agree they're fantastic characters. Next up, we have Eugene. I don't really remember anything about him in Suikoden 4. I thought he was a fairly forgettable character in Suikoden 4, but in Suikoden Tactics, that's another story altogether. He was a mainstay in my party in Tactics. He's one of the best frontline fighters in the game. If I was to rate him based solely off his Suikoden 4 appearance, I'd put him in the D tier. If I was to rank him based off of his Tactics appearance, I'd put him in the B tier. So I think I'm going to go mid-ground and put him in the C tier, because he's a waste of a character slot in Suikoden 4, but he's incredible in Suikoden Tactics. And next we have Flare, and if I'm ranking Flare, I'll rank Lino with her. I don't really want to get into too much detail on either character here. They're main characters, they're great, everybody knows them, everybody likes them. They're both solid B tier characters, so let's put them both in the B tier. Next up is Frederica. I think Frederica is a fantastic character from a lore perspective. She was investigating Graham Cray and the manhunting incidents that happened along the Scarlet Moon Kuluk border. Her village got caught up in the mix and was also destroyed during the raids, and it's because of her that we know so much about the conflict. But they could have done so much more with her story to reveal more of the wars and conflicts between Scarlet Moon and Kuluk. As for her combat ability, she's about as average an all-rounder as they come in both games. She's good at everything, but she excels at nothing. But as she's an archer, she is on the squishy side with low defense, so how do you really use her? She also joins pretty late in both games. She comes in around the last quarter or so of the game, and by that point, you're really not going to use her, as you'll pretty much have your party choices set in stone. I think she's a hard one to rank. Her story and the lore she provides puts her in the A tier, but her combat ability puts her in the C tier. But at the same time, how underutilized she was and all of her unfulfilled potential makes me want to say D tier. She's a character that had the potential to be something special, but again, as is the case with Suikoden 4, it's half-baked. But you know what, I'm feeling generous right now, so I'm going to put Frederica in the B tier, but if they wrote her to her potential, I think she very easily could have been A tier, maybe upper A tier, bordering on S tier. I think she was another failure of the writers. And next we have Fungi, who I am going to throw straight into the D tier. He was the chef for the Knights of Razrul. He's a fairly forgettable character. And after him is Gareth, I think his name was. I honestly have no recollection of what this person done in the game. I'm going to put him in the E tier. I remember his name and I remember his face, but that's it. I have absolutely no recollection of his role in the story, so he's going straight into the E tier. And next up we have Gao, who I am also going to put into the E tier. I think Gao is one of the least interesting characters, not just in Suikoden 4, but in the entire series. I mean, sure, he's great in combat, he hits just as hard as characters like Fuselu and Halak, but he's such a boring, dull, and uninteresting character with an incredibly ugly design. I don't like anything about him, and I outright refuse to use him. He's lucky I'm not putting him in the garbage tier. The only thing keeping him out of garbage tier is that he's good in combat. You know what, looking at the list, I still have about half of the characters to go through. That's a lot of people left. This could be a lot longer than I was expecting it to be. I thought this would have been the shortest of the character ranking videos, but it turns out it may actually end up being the longest of the character ranking videos. I've just noticed there's nobody in the S tier yet. And I am very surprised at how many people are in A and B. Very surprised. So next, I'll rank Glencotte next. I think Glenn is a great character. He's one of my favorite characters in the entire game. And I think he's probably the best part of Suikoden 4's opening act. You know, he's the commander of the Knights of Gaian. He was strict and demanding with his men and the trainees, but I think that was because of his own experiences in the war between Gaian and Kuluk years prior. He was preparing them because he knew what was going to happen. He was preparing them because he knew what war was like. But despite how, strict and demanding he was, he really did care for his men, and he showed a much softer side in how he treated Laslo. Like, let's be honest, Glenn was a badass. He didn't take crap from anyone, and he willingly threw his life away by using the rune to save Razrul from a large pirate attack. But when it came to dealing with Snow, unfortunately his hands were tied because Snow's dad, who was the Lord of Razrul, he would often, put pressure on Glenn to give Snow responsibilities far beyond his abilities. How can you not love Glenn? Glenn has to go in the A tier. He has to. And since we've ranked Glenn, we have to rank Katarina. She was the vice commander of the Knights of Gaian, but she was also Glenn's daughter, although he had no idea that she was his daughter, as she never said anything. But Katarina, I don't really know how to rank her, in truth. She's a decent mage, but she's nothing special. She's an above average mage. As for her story, she was quick to condemn Laslo for Glenn's death. But to be fair to her, Laslo didn't even try to defend himself, and Snow's dad would have been applying pressure on her. So essentially, it was the words of an orphan knight versus the word of the Lord of Razrul and that of his snivelling coward of a son, who was not only a noble, but a knight also. So I think even if Laslo did try to defend himself, there would have been no way to prove his version of events. And in a case of word versus word, who's going to be trusted? An orphan commoner or the Lord of Razrul? She obviously didn't fully believe that Laslo did it, but she exiled him anyway because I don't think she really had a choice. If she tried to defend him, I think Snow's dad, Vincent, would have probably kicked her out too. I don't know how to rank her. I really don't. She does show remorse, and she tries to repent for her actions later on. She's got a great design. I do love her appearance. She's also a decent mage in both Suikoden 4 and Tactics, but there are better mages in both games, and I rarely use her in either game. Next up, we got Gretchen. She's a decent sword fighter in both Suikoden 4 and Tactics, but I just don't care for her, and I never really use her. I'm going to put her in the D tier. Gunter, I'm going to put you in the C tier solely for your dice game. Haruto, I think, is next. You are the ship's navigator or something. You're going in the E tier. Next, I will rank... Sorry, I forgot his name for a second. Igor. His name is Igor. I'm going to put him in the D tier. No, that's E tier. Sorry. Ugh. Like, what can I say? He lets you play a coin tossing mini game. They're not really the best, but they'll help you pass a few minutes. Kind of a boring character, and I only remember his name because, again, I done the minigame video fairly recently. Next up, we have Isaac. He's the aging veteran warrior who was planning to retire to a peaceful life on Aluya. It's kind of a sad story with him. He joined up when you find him in the ruins on the town on Aluya, and he planted some seeds to grow some flowers in memory of a young girl who he knew there who loved flowers. It's kind of a touching story. He's a really good dude. I do like his story, and I really like him as a person, but after using him a couple of times on my first playthrough, I never used him in battle again in any other playthrough. Not because he's a bad character, but again, it's because he's a victim of the 4-person parties. If the game had 6-person parties, I could have seen myself using him a lot more than I did, and I probably would have put him in maybe in the B tier, but because of the 4-person parties and how easily he's overlooked, I'm going to put him in the C tier. And next up we have Jean. This is the first time she was playable in the series, and my god, she is insanely powerful. She's right up there alongside Warlock and Maxine as the strongest mage in the game, and as always, she's hot as hell. She also showed up in Suikoden Tactics as a combat character, and she was just as powerful there. She's incredible in combat in both games, but combat alone isn't enough. I think I ranked her in the D tier in Suikoden 1, then bumped her to the C tier in Suikoden 1 before dropping her all the way down to D tier in Suikoden 3. But for Suikoden Tactics, I'm going to put her in the B tier solely for how good she is in combat. Jean, I think, she's another character that frankly could be an S tier character if they would finally start unraveling her story. And then next we have Jeremy. If I remember Jeremy, he was a fantastic swordsman. He had good attack and great defense, but he had terrible magic and magic defense, so he wasn't very useful, especially when it came to bosses. I think his story is kind of fun. He basically got conned by Mitsuba and Reinhold, luring him into a duel and losing money, much like all of her other victims. Which I suppose brings me to Mitsuba, and along with her partner in crime, Reinhold. Reinhold has a bit of a funny story. He got roped into being Mitsuba's accomplice after he thought she saw an incriminating letter that she could blackmail him with, but truth is, she had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. She just chose not to correct him when he basically committed himself to, a lifetime of servitude to her. He lures unsuspecting victims into battling her for money. They make a fun duo. Reinhold is okay in combat, but kind of underwhelming. Mitsuba is one of the better swordsmen in the game. All three of them do return in Tactics. Mitsuba and Jeremy are pretty good there too, just like they are in 4. But Reinhold, kind of underwhelming in Tactics. It's a bit of a hard one to rank. Mitsuba, I'm going to go in the B tier. Jeremy, I'm going to place in the C tier. And Reinhold, I think I'm going to put him in the D tier because his combat ability is lacking compared to the other two. Next up is Jewel, but along with Jewel, I'm going to rank Kenneth, Tal, and Paula because the 4 of them, they're a package deal. Let's be real. I'm not going to go into too much detail about them here. They're all solid combat characters. They've got nice designs and I do like them all. But I do have a gripe to pick with 2 of them. After the game, after all the years they spent training to become knights, Tal quits the knights after the war to become a fisherman, while Jewel quits and goes home. That's a boring ending for both of them. Kenneth and Paula are definitely my favourite 2 of the 4. Kenneth, he rises up and becomes the vice commander of the Knights of Razrul, and Paula does remain a knight. I just like their endings more, they stuck through everything they worked hard to become. And then in Suikoden Tactics, we did get a reunion of the group. We had all of them back together again alongside Katarina, Laslo and Snow, and it was nice to see them all back together one last time. I'm going to go Kenneth and Paula I'm going to put in the A tier. Maybe people will agree, maybe they won't. As for Jewel and Tal, I'm going to put them both in the B tier. Next we have Carl. I'm going to throw him straight into the C tier. I mean, if we're talking strictly Suikoden 4, he's a pretty good combat character. But he's just not a very interesting character. He's fairly boring and he has an ugly design. But if we're factoring in Suikoden Tactics, he's got a bit of a story and he's much more likable. After he heard a bunch of kids got kidnapped, he rushed off to rescue them by himself. It's pretty reckless, but it does show you the type of person he is. And just like in Suikoden 4, he's a solid combat character in Tactics as well. I think C tier is fair because he's really lacking a story, like a proper story in Suikoden 4, which is partially made up for by Tactics. I think Tactics alone would probably put him in the B tier, but Suikoden 4 alone would put him in the D tier, so I do think C is a fair ranking for him. Then next we have Keen. I don't care, I am putting him straight into the E tier. I don't like his character at all. I never liked him, I never cared for him, I don't even find him remotely interesting. He was hired by Stottelheim Reinbach II. Again, I've butchered that pronunciation. He was hired to track down and kill Sigurd after Sigurd left Reinbach's service as he knew too much about his dealings. Kind of an interesting story, but I don't know, maybe it's his design, maybe it's his attitude, his personality, I don't know, but I just don't like Keen at all. I never did, and I probably never will. Yeah, I'm going to rank Leknot next. She's been sitting there at the front of the list for a while now, and I'm going to put her in the A tier, just like I did in all of the previous videos. I just want to know her story. You know, give us something. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's your end game? Is it really just to keep the balance of the world? How do you know so much about the true runes? She's such a fascinating character, but it's just so frustrating, never being given any details. Next we got Kevin, and with Kevin I'll rank Pam. You know, they're husband and wife, you gotta rank them together. They were survivors of Aluya Island, and they opened up a restaurant on your ship. They're not very useful characters, they're not very interesting characters either, but they've got a sympathetic backstory. I'm thinking be generous and go C tier, but you know what? I'm being too generous with some people's rankings, so I'm sorry. Your sympathetic backstory is not enough. You're both going in the B tier, or the D tier. Next we have Conrad. He was a friend of Glenn and Katarina's magic instructor. I believe he fought in the war between Gaian and Kuluk years prior to the game. You know, there's not really much to say about him from a story perspective, and when it comes to combat, he's pretty good, but there are better. I'll put him in the C tier. Next up, we have Laslo. I know a lot of people say he's the worst and least interesting of the protagonists in the main series, but Thomas from Suikoden 3 exists, so he's clearly not the worst. But seriously, Laslo gets a bad rep because of how much people dislike the game itself, and that dislike of the game bleeds over into Laslo, who bears the brunt of that criticism just for being the lead character. But if you actually dig into his story and pay attention, he's a fairly well-written character. Laslo's entire life is one of loneliness and tragedy. He's the lost son of the King of Obel, he's the Prince of Obel. When he was just a baby, he was out on a patrol ship with his mother, the Queen of Obel. They were attacked by pirates, and his mother, who had the Rune of Punishment, used the rune to fend off a pirate attack. Laslo got blown overboard, where he was eventually found by a Gaian patrol ship. Vincent Fingerhut, the Lord of Razral, took him in to be his son's friend and companion. He grew up living next to a kitchen to be trained as a knight. He watched his commander and father figure die. He's betrayed by his best friend out of jealousy for being everything that he was meant to be. He's distrusted and cast out by his vice commander and two of his other friends. He's exiled from his home. He finally meets his real father and sister, who have no idea who he is, other than the fact that he bears the same rune his mother once did. He's practically killing himself every single time he uses the rune's power to protect those around him. He's not only thrust into a war that doesn't involve him, but he's made the leader of the entire thing. And then at the end of the war, he doesn't know that he's broken the rune's curse, so he chooses to live in isolation on a deserted island, possibly forever, seeing as he's now ageless, just so that he won't risk inflicting the rune's curse on anyone else. Laslo's entire life and his entire story is one of tragic loneliness. People hate him because they hate the game. Laslo isn't the problem with Suikoden 4, and the criticism he receives is unfair. Suikoden 4 has many problems, but Laslo isn't one of them. I'll admit his outfit does look stupid, but he's a fantastic character, and I'm going to put him in the A tier. And that's only because I feel like his character does partially suffer because of the game's shortcomings. He could very easily be an S tier character if the game was just that little bit better. Right, next up I'll rank the mermaids. Lilin, Lilan, Lilu, I don't even remember all of them. But with the exception of Lilin, who actually had some moments in the story, I can't tell who is who and I don't care. Frankly, 4 of these 5 characters felt like total wastes of character slots. They all fill the same role of crafting accessories on your ship. They remind me a lot of the blacksmiths from Suikoden 1. It's totally unnecessary to have one role divided up by so many characters. 4 of these characters should have been optional recruits that didn't take up a Star of Destiny. Like how the squirrels were in 2, the dogs were in 3, the Do-Re-Mi elves were in 5. They shouldn't have been 5 Stars of Destiny. But I'm going to put Lilin in the C tier, and the rest of them I'm going to put in the D tier. Honestly, the only thing keeping them out of the E tier is that I do like their designs. And then next up we have the Low siblings. I don't remember their names, but I do remember that they were all called Low something and they were running some scam on Mordo Island with the hot springs. That's it. Aside from that, I thought they were boring, forgettable, and uninteresting characters, so they are all going in the E tier. Then we have Manu. I think he was the elevator guy, another highly forgettable character. I'm going to put him in the D tier because at least the elevator was useful. Then we have Mao and Now, don't we? Mao and Now? Is that Mao? Mao is the mint guy, Now is the mushroom guy. I don't know, I'm going to put them both in the D tier. The minigame was fun, the mint vs mushroom wars. It was a fun minigame, but it was really annoyingly time consuming to set up, so it's not something that I'd done often, and I really just largely ignored them. They were fairly forgettable characters. Next up we have Maxine. I really don't know how to rank her. She is incredible in combat. She's just as good as Jean and Warlock as a mage. She's one of the best mages in the game. But her story is kind of dull and boring. She's hired by Ramada to take your rune. Obviously she fails and she ends up joining you just like Ramada did. Is her combat ability really enough to make up for her boring story? I don't think so. She does show up in tactics as well, and she's pretty powerful there. I think she shows up fairly early in tactics, so she does become a lot more useful in tactics than she was in 4. I'm going to put her in the C tier though, because I don't know, I just don't really like her story. Next we've got Millie. I don't know how anyone can dislike Millie. Is it Millie or Millie? I don't know, I'm going to say Millie. I'm going to put her straight into the A tier. She is a damn good all-round combat character. Yes, she doesn't excel at anything, but she is really good at everything. She's a very versatile character in both Suikoden 4 and Tactics. And story-wise, I think she's a lot of fun. Even though she doesn't have a whole lot going on for her, she was chosen by Reinbach's dad to marry him. But she didn't want to marry him, so she ran away and fled Middleport, and then he sent thugs after her to retrieve her. Laslo rescues her, and then she develops a giant crush on him, and she kind of spends the entire game swooning all over him. I think it's a fun story, and her design is super cute, so she's going in the A tier. I think she's a wonderful character. Right, next we got Nabokov. He was the appraiser. I don't care about him. He's going in the D tier. Then we have Natalie. You are also going in the D tier. She was the window setting girl. I used her on the first playthrough when I was kind of fiddling about with the window settings, seeing what all of the different windows looked like, but I never used her again after that. And next we got Nico. He was the ship's lookout. Again, you're going in the D tier. He doesn't do much of anything, and he's a fairly forgettable character. Next up is Noah, who I think is one of the most adorable characters in the entire series. She's just a little kid who loves to dress up as a Nakobold for her own amusement, and I think that's really cute. But she's also a thief and a grifter who loves to screw people over at cards. And I think it's kind of funny. She's also, if I'm remembering, a playable character in Tactics, but she wasn't really useful in Tactics because all she could really do was steal from enemies. She couldn't attack. So I never really used her there. But you know what? I don't care. I really like her as a character. She's absolutely adorable and her card game is a lot of fun. So I'm going to put her in the B tier. Next we have Oleg. I'm just going to throw him in the D tier. He was the guy who recorded what happened on Aluya, but he's another boring, forgettable character. And then we have Pablo, who was... He was the rune cannon maintenance guy on your ship, and he became Warlock's kind of, sort of, but not really apprentice. I'm going to put him in the D tier, which brings me to Warlock. We all know how good of a mage he is, but his story, I think, is even better than his combat ability. He was the one responsible for the creation of the rune cannons. You know, he summoned the giant tree into the world, he harnessed its power to create the rune cannons and its ammunition, and after seeing its powers and realizing what he had done, he regretted what he'd done. He regretted summoning it, he regretted creating the weapon, he outright refused to talk about it, even with his apprentice. And after the war, he was attacked by an angry mob who, they were kind of hell-bent on making him answer for his crimes. Now, you'd think a mage as powerful as Warlock could have easily defeated a mob of civilians, but it seems like, possibly out of guilt or to repent for what he had done, he just accepted his fate and allowed them to kill him. I think he's got a really good story, and he's an incredible mage. He's right up there with Jean and Maxine as the best in the game. But I simply don't use him, and once again, that's because of the game's restrictive 4-person party. I don't need 2 squishy mages in my party. I'm going to put him in the B tier. I think B tier is fair for Warlock. And then next we have Pecola. That's all I remember about her. Her name, I don't remember anything else. She's going in the E tier. Next up we have Peralt. I like the newspaper feature. It was in 3 and 5 as well. I think it's a fun way to kind of catch up on the details of what just happened in the story. And it's a fun bit of light entertainment, giving us a bit of extra lore about characters. So I do like it. I'm going to put him in the C tier. Phil, the crafter. I don't really have anything to say about him. I'm going to throw him in the C tier. And next we have Rotji and Ricky. I like them both and they've got a sad story, but let's be honest, they're not exactly important or useful in any way, so I'm going to put them both in the C tier. Then we have Renee. I'm also going to put her in the C tier. She was the treasure mini hunt game girl. I didn't exactly like it or hate it, and I don't exactly like or dislike her either, so I think C tier is fair. Next up, we got Rita. Rita is my girl. She's going right into the A tier. You thought I was going to say S because of how much I love Ritapon, but no, she's going in the A tier. Ritapon is the greatest minigame in the Suikoden series. I love how cheerful and full of excitement she always is. She's such a fun character. She was more of a mage with okay fighting ability in Suikoden 4, but in Tactics they turned her into more of a melee focused character. I'm not really sure why. I love Rita. She's staying in the A tier. We're getting there. We're getting close to the end of the Suikoden 4 characters, so next up is Selma. She's one of the few elves who's not a haughty jerk. And, you know, she thinks the human-elf feud is stupid. She reminds me a lot of Kirkus in many ways. But she is a bit of an odd combat character. At first glance, you think she's a fighter because she's carrying a big-ass sword. But it turns out she's a much better mage than a fighter. And then in Suikoden Tactics, she got a bit of a nerf, making her like a weaker version of Mitsuba, and she ends up not being very useful. I really like her character, but she's just kind of all over the place in terms of combat, so I'm kind of torn between B and C. But you know what, she's cute and I like her design, so I'm going to put her in the B tier. Then next we have Setsu. I hate this guy. I don't even want to talk about him. He's going straight into the garbage tier. And next up we have Shiramine, and I'm going to rank Ugetsu alongside of him. I'm going to put them both in the E tier. Maybe that's harsh, but anybody who's watched my minigame ranking videos knows how I feel about fishing minigames. I hate them. I'm not sure why we needed two characters in this game to fill the exact same role. Pole fishing and net fishing, they should have been done by a single character through a dialogue option. There was no need to split it among two characters. They offer nothing of value to me and I just don't care for them. I hate fishing, I hate everything surrounding fishing, and I hate their characters. Next up we have Taisuke. I think Taisuke, I'm not entirely certain on that, I may be wrong. I'm going to put him in the C tier. Across the board, I always put the bat guys in the C tier. I like the bat scenes for the extra bit of character lore we get, but they're usually very forgettable characters, but they go in the C tier just for the extra lore that we get. Then we have Tanya. I'm also going to put her in the C tier. She's, again, a fairly forgettable character, but just like the bats, I love the old books for the extra lore that it gives us. Next up is Ted. I love Ted in Suikoden 4. He is by far one of the best characters in the game. He's a solid all-rounder, he's got great attack, great magic, and he's got a very interesting backstory with the Fog Ship Guide. If you remember in the Suikoden 1 character ranking video, I was quite harsh. I think I was quite harsh. I didn't like him in Suikoden 1. I found him to be annoying and I ranked him in the D tier. But looking back, I think maybe I was too harsh on him. Now this could be my love for him from Suikoden 4 talking, but if I was to rank the Suikoden 1 cast again, I'd probably put Ted in the B tier. And maybe I'm trying to partially make up for my harshness in the Suikoden 1 video, but I'm going to put Ted in the A tier. Again, that could be guilt from my previous harshness, but I don't know, I'm putting him in the A tier because he is a wonderful character in Suikoden 4. Okay, next up we have Tov, but that can't be right because this is Travis's picture. We have Travis, Tristan. Oh, I see where I went wrong. I mixed up Tov and Ugetsu. That is my bad. Sorry about that. But Tov is going straight back into the E tier anyway, so it doesn't make a difference. He was the guy who built the ship, but fairly forgettable and uninteresting character. Then next we have Travis, who is also going into the E tier. I remember recruiting him at the Obel Ruins where he tricks you into using an escape talisman. And the only reason I remember this character is because how much it annoyed me having to run all the way through the ruins again to recruit him. I remember nothing else about him, which tells you just how uninteresting he is as a character, so E tier it is for him. Next we have Tristan. He is one of my favourite characters in Suikoden 4. I'm going to put him in the A tier. So he's got a funny story, I think. He's a hypochondriac. He always thinks he's extremely ill, but in reality he's in perfect health and the doctors have to give him placebos. He's probably the best tank in the game. Both his physical and magical defense is incredibly high, but that's made up for by the fact that his attack is incredibly low. But that doesn't really matter. You can throw a counter rune on him and watch him counter damn near every attack. Or you could give him a double strike rune so that he deals double damage, which brings his damage up to the standard of other characters. Sure, he'll take an extra 50% damage, but his defense is high enough to make sure that doesn't really matter. His combat playstyle certainly isn't to everyone's taste, but I think he's great. He does return in Suikoden Tactics as well, but in Suikoden Tactics he turns into a very dodge and counter heavy character with great physical defense, but they severely nerfed his magical defense to balance him out. I like him a lot and he's one of my favourite characters from Suikoden 4, so I'm keeping him in the A tier. I was tempted to put him in the S tier, but he's not quite S tier material. Then next up we have Vicky, the ever adorable airheaded Vicky. She is straight into the S tier. How can anyone not love Vicky? No more needs to be said about her. And the final Suikoden 4 character, we have Wendell. Wendell is an absolute blast. She's a total tomboy and she's as blunt as possible in Suikoden Tactics, how she speaks to Kirill. Kind of like, why the hell didn't you help us in the Island Liberation War? I love her design. She's cute. She's great in combat too. Looking at her weapon, you'd kind of think, okay, she's a fighter, but she's actually a far better mage, which is odd. She's one of the better mages in the game, I think. But then in Suikoden Tactics, it's, again, the usual case. She's the opposite, where she's more of a fighter. I don't know why, it's weird. I really like her character though, so I'm going to put Wendell in the A tier. And now we're on to the Tactics exclusive characters. I might be a little hazy on the details here, as it's been quite a while since I last played Tactics. But we're going to start with Kirill. He's the protagonist of Suikoden Tactics. He's one of the kindest souls in the entire series. But before we get into Kirill, let's talk about his parents, Walter and Jan. About a decade or so before the events of Suikoden 4, Walter met Jan, who was a being from another world who was summoned into the Suikoden world thanks to Warlock's experiments. Walter realized that she appeared in this world around the same time as the Rune Cannons and kind of discovered that there was a connection between her and the Rune Cannons, so he set out to investigate them to find a way to send her home. But during their travels, Walter and Jan eventually fell in love and had a son named Kirill. Now, Jan is a goat. She's got the horns of a goat, the ears of a goat, the furry legs of a goat, she's got hooves. Her face and neck are human. What about the rest of her? I don't know, but based on what we can see, she appears more goat than human. I think Walter's got some explaining to do. But Jan's tale is actually fairly sad. She's pulled into another world. She's stranded on this strange and unfamiliar world all alone until she meets Walter. But while she's in this new world, while she's in the Suikoden world, she's unable to speak, which must have made the experience even more terrifying for her. Anyway, back to Walter. He meets a quick end near the beginning of Suikoden Tactics, being turned into a fishman right in front of Kirill, leaving Kirill traumatized for pretty much the entire game whenever he comes face to face with one of those fish monsters. I think Kirill is one of the more interesting protagonists in the series, and it helps that he's not a silent protagonist. It really allows his story and his character to be shown. He does meet a lonely end, much like both of his parents do. Jan returns to her homeworld with Walter's soul, but Kirill chooses to remain in the Suikoden world. But he's now ageless in the Suikoden world, even though he doesn't have a true rune. And he chooses to journey the world alone. Maybe we'll see him again one day, and I hope we do, because he is an incredible character, and I think he is one of the best protagonists in the entire series. I'm going to put Kirill in the S tier, and I'm going to put Walter and Jan in the B tier. I think that's fair rankings for them. Then, of course, that does bring me to Andark and Seneca. They're Walter's loyal subordinates. Andark is a bit of a stiff, he's always serious and kind of uptight. Seneca is the exact opposite. She's more light-hearted and witty. She's often teasing Andark just to get a rise and a reaction out of him. And Andark falls for the bait every single time. I think they make a fun duo, and after Walter's death, they continued to look out for and protect Kirill, accompanying him for the entire game. I'm going to put them both in the B tier along with Walter and Jan. I think they're great characters. Then Iscus is next, so I might be in the minority here, but I really liked Iscus as a villain. He was a member of the patriarchal faction within Kuluk, who were at odds with the imperial faction vying for power. He came up with a plan to try and seize power for himself. I think he disguised himself as a merchant to try and get hold of something called an eye fish or a fish eye, so that he could create the evil eye, which was a part of the rune cannons that were closed, as if they were open they could turn humans into fishmen. So he basically planned to create this army of fishmen so he could grow his own power and the power of the patriarchal faction in Kuluk, and he would use this to kill the emperor and the crown prince. not only that, but he had been seducing the prince's wife behind his back. He was having an affair with her, and his plan was basically kill the emperor, kill the prince, marry the prince's wife, and rule as regent from behind the scenes, essentially using the Princess Miranda as a figurehead. I'm kind of stuttering over the details here because it's been a long time since I've played Suikoden Tactics, so I'm a little hazy on it while I'm trying to remember. But he's such a horrible person. You know, he treated everyone as an expendable tool. He was willing to sacrifice and betray everyone and anything to achieve his goals. Even his most faithful companions were just another rung on the ladder for him to step on and climb. Now, obviously, ultimately, his plan did fail, and while he intended to grow the strength and influence of Kuluk, the exact opposite happened, and his plan resulted in the dissolution and collapse of the Empire. So, you know, there's that. I'm going to put him in the B tier. I think he's a great villain. And now that he's ranked, I have to rank his faithful companion, Roger. I think it's Roger. I'm going to put him in the C tier. I liked him. He was a decent character. He spent the majority of the game working for Iskis, fighting against you, listening to every order that Iskis gave him. Everything he'd done, he genuinely thought was for the greater good of Kuluk. But when Iskis betrayed him and left him to die, and then he got rescued by Kirill and his group, he started to see the type of person that Iskis really was, and he joined up with you. I think he's a very good character. And then we have Heinz. I don't like him at all. I'm going to put him straight into the D tier. I think he's a horrible person. He was an agent of the Scarlet Moon Empire. He was sent to retrieve the rune cannons, I think, but then he attempted to kidnap Princess Cresselia. He's a horrible character. I hate him, but we're supposed to hate him, so I guess job well done by the writers. He did meet a fitting end. He died in the gutter where he belongs. And then we have his subordinate, Coop. I'm going to put him in the C tier. Coop is a much better character than Heinz. After Coop saw what the rune cannons were capable of, when he saw what the evil eye could do, and after Heinz tried to kidnap Cresselia, he defied Heinz's orders and sided with Kirill, agreeing that the evil eye and the rune cannons should be destroyed. But while Coop is a great guy, I remember him being absolutely garbage in combat. He was pretty much the definition of a glass cannon. Yeah, he could take pretty much anything down, but a wet paper bag could just as easily take him down. So I'm putting him in the C tier. And then we have, I'm not even really sure why they're on the list, but we have the mercenaries. These guys were often hired throughout the game and pitted against you. They eventually joined you, but I don't know why you'd use them over the named characters. They oddly gave them more backstory than they should have. They used to work for Stuttelheim Rheinbach II under the command of Sigurd, but after Sigurd left Rheinbach, they also left and went their own way. I don't really know how to rank them, to be honest. They're just kind of like generic recruits. There's no reason to use them, but I guess kind of fun to use them at the same time, and they oddly do have a backstory. I'll put them in the D tier. I don't know. I genuinely don't know how to place them. Maybe D tier is harsh, but I don't know. I really don't. And then next we have Simeon. Simeon is right up there next to Jean as the most powerful mage in Tactics. Like, from the moment you get him, I'd be very surprised if you ever took him out of your party, but he doesn't join till just over, I think, halfway through the game. I think I spoke about him a bit in the Jean video that I made. I think he's a fascinating character. He appears to have achieved some form of agelessness despite not having a true rune. His appearance is far younger than he actually is, and there are stories of his good deeds helping those in need dating back decades and decades. He seems familiar with Jean, but in classic Suikoden fashion, their relationship is of course a complete mystery and we know absolutely nothing about him. Suikoden sure does love introducing mysterious mages that explain nothing and only add more questions and confusion. But you know, he is a good character overall. I'm going to put him in the A tier. not many left. We have 6 characters to go. So next we have Martin, who is the Crown Prince of Kuluk. He's a straight up badass warrior, but he's also a total dumbass because I think he devoted his entire life to his military service and he completely neglected his marriage, although he was highly protective of his daughter. His family drama played a big role in Iskis being able to carry out his plans. Martin's neglect of his wife, Miranda, allowed Iskis to swoop in and comfort her, which led to them having an affair. But when Iskis's plans were uncovered, Martin did try to stop him, but unfortunately he failed and he was turned into a fish monster along with the Emperor. His wife, Miranda, who wasn't in the capital at the time, I don't believe. I don't think she was. I don't fully remember, but later on in the game, towards the end, she did eventually see what a horrible person Iskis was, and she attempted to kill him. Unfortunately, she failed, and Iskis killed her instead. I'm going to put Martin in the B tier, and I'm going to put Miranda in the D tier. And then we have their daughter, Cresselia, the princess of Kuluk, and I don't really know what to say about her, to be honest. I feel like saying too much would spoil her journey, but I mean, I've already spoiled the whole thing by talking about Kirill, Walter, and Iskis, so but look, I've kind of covered a lot of her story with Kirill and the others already, but she joined Kirill for the vast majority of the game. I don't like the ending. After seeing what happened with the patriarchal faction and the imperial faction, how they were kind of tearing Kuluk apart from within, constantly in conflict and vying for power. At the end of the game, now that the throne was hers, she decided to dissolve the entire empire, which, thinking about it, wouldn't that just cause more conflict and problems in the area? Because now you have all of the cities splintering off into small city-states with all of the nobles grabbing power for their own and attacking each other and trying to get more power. I don't know, the whole thing just felt kind of dumb, the ending, but at the same time, she's like, was she like 12 or something? She's a child. What does she know? All she wanted to do was travel the world and go find her friend Kirill, who took off. Like, I really don't know how to rank Cresselia, and I'm kind of rambling and ranting, and I don't know, I'll put her in the B tier. I do like her as a character, I just really hate the ending. And then we have Ornella and Busk, who are brother and sister. From a story standpoint, I thought Ornella was awesome, and I thought Busk was alright, but I don't really know how to rank them. They both joined so late in the game that I honestly never really used them. I'll put Ornella in the B tier and I'll put Busk in the C tier. And finally we have Lalakal. She's the quest giver from the quest guild throughout the entire game. She becomes recruitable on New Game Plus and she is absolutely insane. She might just be the most overpowered and broken character in the entire series. Like, you can damn near beat the entire game with her alone. Thus, her design is kind of cute. I'm gonna put her in the B tier. I don't want to rank her higher than that based on combat ability because she doesn't really have much of a story to her. She's just like a really overpowered quest giver. So there you have it, my rankings of the Suikoden 4 and Tactics characters. To all 3 of you who made it this far into the video, do you agree or disagree? Or like many people, do you care so little about this game that you've forgotten who the majority of the cast are? Let me know your thoughts below. Anyway, that's it for this video. My voice is going. Thanks for watching and I'll catch you on the next one.